Welcome to another episode of Smiling Again. This is a super, super special episode. I have with me Christine Yanke. And if there is one word that I would use to describe Christine, there's actually so many I could use. But the one that's at the top of the list is resilient. So Christine is here to share her story with us. And through this story, I think it's going to convey so much hope for so many people. So to help you understand who Christine is, I'm going to read the back of her book. She is also an author. She has written the book called Blinded by an Angel, which is her story. So Christine has been a keynote speaker in mental health conferences, hospitals, addiction facilities, yoga studios, and universities where she's openly shared her story of resilience. Her story reached thousands of people in 2018 when she was featured in Canadian Living magazine. She's also been a mentor to many in the field of addiction and recovery. She specializes in trauma-informed yoga and is also the co-author of clinical research gathered on residential treatment programs. She's a mental health advocate and will be this year's community champion spokesperson for the Run of Women event, which takes place in 18 cities across Canada. I had to read that, Christine, because there's too much goodness in there and I didn't want to miss anything. So welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm super excited because I know this conversation is just going to help so many.
Absolutely.
Your story is unlike any story that I have heard before, and we all have a story, but yours is remarkable.
It's hard to believe when I look back at that story because I don't recognize that girl anymore because she has come so far and grown so much and evolved so much that it's just hard to go back there.
It really is. Knowing who you are now. And I have to say, when I started reading your book, I didn't recognize the Christine in the beginning of the book. So it's interesting how you phrase that and how you talk about it, because I've seen a different side of you, and now I can see how far you've come, which is why I think this story is going to help so many, Christine. So thank you so much for being open and willing to share it.
Absolutely.
So I think the key thing here is that when you're listening to the story, you really get a sense of how you moved through trauma. Everything that happened to you, you continue to move through it. And I think I hope that's what people hear and that they take away from this. And, finding a renewed sense of purpose and meaning in life because of the traumatic events that happen.
Exactly. And that's kind of like where people can't even foresee when they're going through something. They can't imagine that that's going to be something that good that comes out of it, right? We don't see that positive end where we're like, we're going to be on the other side of that. So it's great that when you get that feeling of just giving back to people and just like feeling so fulfilled to be able to share and help and inspire other people. For me specifically, a lot of women have resonated with my story just because I was a single mom. I struggled. I had a job. I was in an addiction facility myself doing treatment. Just the struggles, the big struggles that women are just like, wow, if she can do it, I can do it.
So let's start by giving people an understanding of, what has happened in your life. And if we go back to that moment when the police raided your home, take us back there and help everyone understand what you were feeling and how your life changed in an instant.
Well, it's funny because it's going to be the anniversary in a couple of days. So it's 21 years ago. Yeah, 21 years ago it happened. And yes, my house was raided by the police. I did not expect it. it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and we had just moved to a brand new neighborhood, and my husband was a biker. And I was married, 3 beautiful boys. My youngest was 4. And we were just settling into this new place. And one morning, it's kind of like, I don't know, you probably have been there, Kim, where you're laying there and there's this eeriness and quietness at the same time. And it was like, I felt like there's people outside my window. And it took about 5 minutes or so. And then I started to hear these mumbling of people, like from a distance, that sounded like someone was robbing my house. And so I kind of knocked on my husband and said, "Oh my God, I think we're being robbed." And he sat up and he kind of like just put his hand on me and said, "It's a raid." I said, "What?" He says, "It's a police raid." He says, I said, "I'm going to go get the kids." Like my middle one, or my youngest one, was right in the middle of us. And my 2 older ones were in the room next, and the immediate mother comes out. And he said, "Don't move. If you move and run, they'll shoot you." And knowing trauma now, I realize, going back that far, the trauma was stuck in my body from 21 years ago, right? That I was not able to react. And I froze. And so that happened. And sort of to give you an idea of time frames, he was arrested that day. I had to really take care of the aftermath of this raid. There was 150 bikers in Canada, all arrested at the same time. So all these families had their doors, knocked down at the same time. He was arrested, and thank goodness I had my parents around. They were my godsend, retired and there. And the media frenzy outside in the neighborhood was just very opinionated and judgy. And I had to really deal with that a lot right after the raid. And within about, there was a lot that happened probably in the first 6 months, but mostly he did get out on bail, but then got put back in. And so while he was home for a few months, we kind of realistically said, like, I've been a stay-home mom for 10 years. If I get stuck on my own, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive with these kids? Right? It's like, I didn't know anything other than teaching fitness for, 15 years before that. So we actually went and rented a 24-foot moving truck, and I drove it for 4 days, and I got my DZ license. And my brother, who had worked for the city of Hamilton, which is like there's different kinds of roads and operations jobs. He said, "If you get your DZ, I might be able to get you in kind of like temporary down the line in the garbage department, in the waste department, where you could drive a garbage truck and throw garbage." And I was like, "Yay, that sounds so fun, but I'll get the DZ license." And so I did, and I didn't do anything with it. My husband went back to jail because they took him back there. And within that 3 years, there was a 3-year period before he even went to trial. In that 3-year period, I got a job. I had multiple jobs. I got a full-time job, a great job with the city. However, my disruption in the community made me feel like I couldn't even go anywhere. Like I was really trying to let people in to see who I was, because nobody really knew me. And my boys were within the hockey community. And so I locked arms with, them as fast as I could. And I met a really great mom who I ended up being really good friends with, except she introduced me, or her, not just specifically her, but her group introduced me to cocaine. And so I started to use the stress that I was going through trying to survive by going out on the weekends and happily drinking and doing occasionally on the weekends cocaine. So that increased a little bit over the 3 years. But 3 years later, my husband went to trial, and my parents came down to babysit my kids. And on the way home that day, after trial ended and closed, I called my mom and just told her that I was on my way home. And she was like, "Okay, no problem. I'm going to go to bed. I'll see you when you get home." When I got home, my dad went to bed. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And he said, "Something's wrong with your mother." And I was like, I thought maybe he had been drinking, because my parents were both alcoholics, pretty much either weekend or not. And he came running out minutes later and said, "Something's wrong with your mom." You need to call an ambulance. And I was like, oh my gosh. So within that night, within hours, I lost my mom. She died in her sleep. She was 62 years old, my best friend. I was broken, immediately broken with that happening. And 2 weeks later, I had to go back to show up in court to see if my husband was going to be found guilty or not. And he got found guilty. And so my life unraveled really, really fast. You know, the addiction just hit really big then. I was trying to survive. I was keeping the kids out of my pain. They did not know that I was just so in so much pain. I would drink and do, cocaine at nighttime when they were sleeping. And I would just pretend everything was okay. Cause that's, moms do that. It's like, everything's okay. I know we lost your grandma and I know your dad's in jail, but we're going to be okay, which is ridiculous looking back now. Right. But I didn't want to deal with it. And so within about 3 or 4 months after that, I had to actually get a lawyer to fight to keep my house because they were coming after my home, and that's all that I had left. And my husband ended up going back into court where he was sentenced to 20 years in jail. And so that was really my realization, because I had a lot of hope. I had a lot of hope before then. I was holding on with strings thinking he's coming home. I just need to figure this out until he gets home. And that's my survival was just temporary. And then it became full blown. And what else became full blown was the fact that I jumped more into the addiction.
Mhm.
And within about 3 or 4 months, thank goodness, I figured out that I needed to get help. And I went and actually went into detox and went into a women's program, a day program, and did a 5-week treatment. And that will be 18 years ago, this December, that I went into that program. So that changed my life, just getting sober. And the next 4 or 5 years, I started to really kind of find a little bit more independence. I ended up divorcing my husband. I met a really great guy who's I'm still with right now. He, has been taking care of us all. But 6 years after my mom died, my dad had never been the same. He was broken in so many ways. He ended up dying by suicide. He took his life 6 years later. So that was probably, I think, that was kind of almost the breaking point for me, where I started to have these feelings show up that I couldn't keep compressing, like keeping them down or suppressing. And so a couple years after he died, I'd already done a yoga teacher training, which started to kind of unravel me a little bit. Like I could tell my emotions. I was, through that whole thing, I was seeing tears where I hadn't seen tears in years. It had been like 8, 10 years of just shoving it down. And so I ended up doing a yoga teacher training that started to kind of get me to, I guess, loosen up a bit. I'm not even sure what it did, but it started to show up in triggers. It started to show up where I was becoming skittish and I was paranoid and all these things, which if you look under PTSD, that's what those symptoms are. And I had no idea. So fortunately, I was diagnosed with PTSD, with generalized anxiety disorder, and I got help and I got CBT for 2 years. I found this amazing yoga training to help me because my physical body now was starting to show up in my pain in my shoulders and my hips, my low back. And so what I discovered was that you can do as much talking as you want in therapy, but you cannot take that stored trauma out of your body unless you somatically take it out.
Mhm.
And I found a teacher training that did just that. It geared it towards people who suffer from that. And I became the first person in Canada to get that training. And I've been carrying it since 2013 around communities. I became a yoga trainer for this company. I have used it in an addiction facility for 6 or 7 years. I went back to where I did rehab, which I had not been back to. And I've been part of their treatment program, helping the women there by giving them these classes and helping them as well as it helped me. And we did research, and the research was published last year. So I've been very vocal in the last 8 years, 9 years, telling my story because I was seeing how women reacted. I would talk in the addiction facility and I would be, wow, look at their expressions. there was hope. I could see hope in their eyes. They were crying because they saw themselves in me.
Mm.
And that was huge for me. So this honestly I never would have looked 20 years and say, wow, I am really going to have myself together. I'm going to actually have boys that showed up years later as adults, normal, without any problems. Right. And so I know you just go, wow, people are like, how are your kids okay? I'm like, they are like, I have three beautiful boys. Somehow, I don't know how they showed up without any problems, but so far so good. So that's as short as I could do it, Kim. I mean, there's so much there, but I was trying to give the bigger picture, but there's a lot of in betweens that people just need to hear kind of to get the story.
Yes, I appreciate that. I mean, you went from a traumatic event of, a raid in your home. Not many
Yes.
people experience that. And
Yes.
that is huge. And in a very short period of time, you lost your mom, who you were so close to. And you lost your husband, who was put in jail.
Yes,
And you
exactly.
found yourself living a completely different life and turning to substances.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you put yourself in rehab and you turn things around, and you make that sound so simple. And I know it's not simple. And I know in your book, one of the things that you said was going to rehab wasn't the hard part. It's staying sober every day.
Yes.
So, it's how would you describe how your healthy living, because when we can get into the things that you do, you've talked about your yoga. Tell us how you start your day, and because at the start of your day is when you set yourself up for the frame of mind that you're in, and how does that impact your staying healthy every day, staying sober every day?
Every day is still a day for me where I thank myself, right, that I stay sober. But I don't want to, I can say I'm selfish, but I am selfish in the fact that I do me first. So I get up at 5:36 in the morning, and the first thing that I do is I either go to the gym if I want, go to a class, I teach a yoga class, or I do yoga practice in my home, I work out, I go for a walk on the trails. Everything has to be about my mental health right from the moment I open my eyes. And then I can pursue the rest of the day. And if that's selfish, well, I'm okay with the selfish because I finally had to do that. And I don't have any little people anymore to take care of. So finally that time comes, right, when I can take care of myself. And I surround myself with really good people, right? The positive people. I connect with positive people like yourself. We get to connect online. And my day just rolls out of feeling good, physically moving, and kind of getting my little self-care in, and then carrying it on with the day of doing lots of positive things, and just staying very focused
I
and
love how
dealing with things.
Yes, exactly. Dealing with things. I love how you talk about, some people think that if you take care of yourself first, that it's selfish. And I really do believe that it's self-care. And on the other side, being the wife of an alcoholic, it was quite frustrating at times to see how he would put himself first and take care of himself first. And I really didn't understand it at the time. Whereas I'm in a different situation now, and I'm learning to take care of myself. And everyone listening needs to hear that message of the importance of self-care. It's not selfish, it's self-full, filling yourself up.
Yes, yes. And you said something important though, because your husband, when he was probably drinking, was selfish. So you viewed his, things that weren't healthy as selfish. So it's funny probably to hear somebody say they're selfish, but in a healthy way, right?
Yes.
Because you
Yeah.
might have got that. If it was a healthy thing that he would chose to do, you might be like, oh, okay, and learn from that.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about the yoga, the trauma-informed yoga, because you talked about, holding on to the trauma in your body, which is something that I feel myself.
Hmm.
Shoulders, lower back, neck, it's hips. It's all in there.
Yes.
So we're going to do some work on that. We're going to schedule that in, but tell us a little bit more so people can understand, what does it mean, trauma-informed yoga?
Well, trauma informed really is, I mean, I have a specialization on top of that, but trauma informed just means that really you are, it's using words that are inclusive. People are not feeling alone. We're in this together. We are also not saying like you do this, you do that. There is a sense of oneness when we talk to people in a yoga class. And we are a teacher. We're not an instructor. We're telling you what to do. We want you to actually feel like you have permission or control again with your own self. And if you have been traumatized or have held trauma in your body for a very long time, you haven't connected physically with your body. And so there's some neglect there, right? And the reason you probably haven't is because you don't want to feel, and you have to feel to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me running all that time, I mean, I was like this, right? Every time something happens, you're just like, you can feel your body. And eventually there's a special little muscle called your psoas muscle. When you think about it, it's responsible for helping you curl in. It shortens because you've spent all this time. In fact, it really shortens if you never get out of that. And so when you start to do this trauma yoga or the yoga that I teach, we actually release and reset your psoas muscle because you really need to dig into that. And then you can't just like let it go. You have to work towards sort of, a little bit at a time, working through that. And that's anything that is pain in your body that's showing up. What people need to realize, I mean, I hear it all the time. Oh, I'm out of shape. Oh, I'm not flexible. Oh, I'm too old. That's why I have a sore this and a sore that. If your body's in pain, legitimately for other, like if you have obviously health issues, your body is speaking to you. It's saying, help me, right? Like stress it just sticks in our body. And so somatically, these classes are moving through the body, grounding ourselves, and also very slow limbic movements. That's how we get the physical part of the trauma out of our bodies. And so, we can all do the mental and emotional work, but we need to also put that physical together and start to move through the body. And that's where it starts to unwind very slowly.
It's interesting listening to what you're saying, because when I started yoga, I started with yin yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just drawn to yin because it was slow and, holding the poses for long periods of time. And I found that quite helpful. So it's interesting to hear you mentioned, doing things slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And the importance,
which is very hard. It's hard. I'm surprised you liked it because it's hard to slow down because you're like this, right?
It took me a long time to slow down before I even got on a mat. This
honestly
has been in a process for years. Really, it takes time. So it's the slowing down and being still that I think took me the longest amount of time. And I think that's one of the things that I found challenging about healing is you have to be patient.
It's lifetime for me. I think it's for the rest of my life.
Exactly.
It's never going to stop.
Exactly. It's never going to stop. So I'm going to read something from your book, if I might.
Sure.
And then if we can discuss this, you talk about, I have chosen to have a growth mindset instead of a fixed one. Instead of avoiding challenges and hoping that they will go away, I choose to embrace them. And I think there's many of us that when things happen, we sometimes can close our eyes and wish them away, or wish that somebody would come along and rescue us. But the only one that's going to rescue you is yourself.
Exactly.
So would you like
there's that big word,
that?
There's the big word, fear. Which holds a lot of us back. And it's a matter of changing, what does fear mean, right? Because when you're fearful or you're excited, your body reacts the same. So I actually have an acronym for fear. It's feeling, excited, and ready. So when I fear something, I say, go. because it gets me uncomfortable, and I'm always uncomfortable. And I've made a lot of choices that I was like, I don't know, right? It's that, but I should, because I know I'll grow from it. And when I've done it, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I did that, right? Where I would never have felt that 20 years ago. I was just too vulnerable and afraid to lose things, right? Afraid to try, afraid to lose, because you're in that mindset of, oh, well, why bother try it? Because it's not going to happen. Or, bad things just happen to me, where I reversed it. And a lot of it I learned from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where you turn negative thoughts into positive thoughts. I spent 2 years doing that. And that was the biggest lesson that I needed to learn. And I've really been working at that still from like 2012. For 10 years, I've been working at that. And I always just try to look at how, if it's something that's not good or negative or scared of doing it, why am I scared of it? Like, I have to say to myself, why? Because it's a good thing, right? And that's where all that kind of comes from, because there's a lot of people really stuck.
Absolutely. So if I take you back to what you said about when you feel that fear, you just say, go.
Yeah.
So I love that. And that's what I try to do, using the Mel Robbins 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And so I give myself that count of 5 to go. Because I totally agree. But how do you get to that point where you're ready to do that? Because maybe there's a bit of space of time when you're not quite ready for that. Do you think there's a period when you're, I guess maybe you just know when you're ready to go?
I think you have to be ready, right? You have to, you have to get a little bit vulnerable. And did I think I was going to be ready to tell my story? No. Like, I shut it down for 10 years, and I ran away from people who asked me, hey, how you doing? How's your husband? That's like the worst question people could ask me for 10 years after. It's like, or like, oh, you're that house, or you're that lady. Right. And so I was afraid to even say my name. And so but then that changed to being proud of myself. I got to a time when I was like, no, I'm proud of who I am. And so I started being more open. And those little pockets of openness really kind of cracked me a little bit more, because I started to see the value in the information or the life experiences I was giving people. I was seeing how much they could see, again, themselves in me, and go, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. And then it just, then it kept going, oh, well, I fear this, but guess what happened when I did it the last time? And then you just become fearless. And that's where I wrote my book. And I was like, it's all coming out. And honestly, the moment I pressed that publish button, it felt like 10 pounds came off my shoulders, because all the questions I had been asked for years and years and years, I answered in a 400-page book. It became like this whole, like, phew, like, wow, like it's done, it's gone. And so, yeah, I think you have to be ready, but it's baby steps, right? You don't want to, jump at something and then go, ooh, that was a bad decision, but feel uncomfortable. Be okay with uncomfortable, right? Don't be okay with just staying here and never trying anything. Let yourself get uncomfortable and see the results, see what happens.
Absolutely. It's all about moving through the trauma.
You got it.
Keep moving,
yes.
Keep doing, keep taking action.
Yes. No tap dancing around her. That's what I said. I tap danced around her for many, many years, and then I had to go through it. And that is the toughest part. But when you get to the other side, it's amazing. It is.
Your dog.
He doesn't leave my side. He just keeps moving around. Honest to goodness.
Oh, he's fabulous. So the last question I'm going to ask you, Christine, or not quite the last question. What do you think is the most important thing that you would like people to hear today after hearing your story?
Oh, wow. There's so many things I'd like to tell people, but never give up. I think never give up. It does not matter whether you are an addict like I was, or you've lost your home, or you have no money. I struggled with all those areas, and I never gave up. Keep going. You'll get through it. Just, have hope, and just keep walking forward, and try not to let things, pull you down. And it's okay to go down, but make sure that you come up stronger. So that's what I think the most important is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, this is why I was so excited for people to hear your story, because of the amount of hope that you convey with so many challenges that you've overcome. And many of us have our challenges in private, whereas you had a whole media storm around you to add that layer to everything that you were dealing with. So many challenges in such short period of time, really. And look at you now, just a radiant bundle of sunshine and energy. To have that much of your energy, I think would be amazing.
Speaking of, that energy, but also gratitude, right? We haven't even mentioned that word. Being grateful for the things we have instead of the things that we don't have, right? That little switch. We could say, oh my gosh, I don't have a house anymore. But we could say, yeah, but we have a beautiful apartment. Like, that's how I can make the switch, right? That just
Absolutely.
Look at what you have, right? Look at what you have.
Yeah. Now, speaking of gratitude, I do end every episode with gratitude. And I ask my guests, what are 3 things that you're grateful for right now, Christine?
I'm grateful for my health always. I'm grateful for my family. And I'm grateful for opportunity to really share and help people, and really feel like there is, there's a purpose in my life. That is what I'm grateful for, that I'm able to use my story and create and help other people's stories.
And that's wonderful. Well, I thank you for being here with us today, sharing your story. I'm super grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that I met you. Out of all the thousands of people, in the community where we met, that we connected. And I know I'm going to do some yoga with you.
Yes, you can. Yep. We'll figure it out.
So I'm super grateful to know you. And
thank you.
For anyone that's listening, I hope that you take away from you the resilience that Christine shows, and how you can have that resilience too, by moving through the trauma. Little steps, moving through the trauma. Go, as Christine says, if you feel the fear, go, keep moving forward and don't give up. And if you can do that, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll be smiling again a lot more often.
Yes.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you for having me.